The river's icy fingers closed around Dahlia's throat as Caspian's hands pressed her deeper into the current. Black water filled her mouth, her nose, flooding her lungs with liquid darkness that burned worse than any fire. Her fingers clawed uselessly at the stones beneath her, nails tearing against the rocks, as the freezing cold stole the last warmth from her limbs. "Did you think you could hide it from me?" Caspian's voice reached her through the water, distorted and terrible, his breath hot against her ear in the split second he yanked her face above the surface. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize the mark when I saw it?" Dahlia gasped, choking on river water and fear, her swollen belly pressing against the muddy bank as he shoved her down again. The child within her kicked frantically, a desperate flutter of life that matched the thunder of her failing heart. 6 months of hiding. 6 months of scrubbing pots in the cult's kitchen, keeping her head bowed and her sleeves long, pretending she was nothing more than another broken servant. And now, because she'd reached for a high shelf and her sleeve had slipped, revealing the crescent moon birthmark on her inner wrist, she was going to die in a frozen river with her unborn daughter. The water closed over her again, and this time her struggles grew weaker. Her vision sparked with white light, not the moonfire her mother had whispered about in the dark moments before the cult had taken her, but the simple light of a brain starving for oxygen. She was going to die here. Her baby was going to die here. And Caspian Ravencrest, the cult's most devoted hunter, would return to the compound as a hero who had extinguished the last of the Moonfire Bloodline. "I'm sorry," she thought, her hand pressing against her stomach even as her arms lost their strength. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried." A roar shattered the night. The hands on her head vanished. Dahlia's body, suddenly free, rolled with the current, and she clawed her way to the surface through instinct alone, her lungs screaming as they finally found air. She heard shouting, Caspian's voice, high with shock, and then a sound that made every hair on her body stand upright. A snarl so deep and primal that it seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the riverbed. A massive form crashed through the water toward her. Dahlia tried to scramble away, but her limbs wouldn't obey, her body shutting down from cold and trauma. Strong arms closed around her. Not Caspian's thin, cruel grip, but something warmer. Something that lifted her from the water as easily as she might lift a kitten. She heard her own voice making sounds, weak protests and desperate pleas, but the words made no sense even to her own ears. "I have you." The voice was deep as the river, warm as a summer she couldn't remember. "You're safe now. I have you." Safe. The word meant nothing. Safety was a lie servants told themselves to make it through another day. Safety was the illusion that shattered every time a master's hand fell too hard, or a hunter's gaze lingered too long on a forbidden mark. But the arms holding her didn't hurt. They cradled her against a chest that radiated heat like a furnace. And when she forced her eyes open, she caught a glimpse of chaos. Wolves snarling, a pale figure scrambling up the riverbank, someone shouting, "He's running." "The woman," someone was saying. "She's pregnant, Your Majesty, and half drowned. She needs—" "I know what she needs." The chest beneath Dahlia's cheek rumbled with barely contained fury. "Send hunters after that creature. I want him found before dawn." "Your Majesty." The words penetrated the fog of Dahlia's failing consciousness. She tilted her head back, trying to see the face of her rescuer, but all she caught was an impression of dark hair and amber eyes before the darkness finally claimed her. 3 days earlier, Dahlia had still believed she might survive. The cult compound sprawled across the valley like a scar, its gray buildings huddled together against the mountain shadow. Dahlia had lived within its walls for 19 years, first as a child in the nursery, then as a kitchen worker, always as property. She had never known her mother. The woman had died in childbirth, they told her, though sometimes in the dark hours of night, Dahlia dreamed of gentle hands and whispered words about fire and moons and queendoms lost to time. She learned early to keep her head down. She learned to be invisible, to anticipate what was needed before it was demanded, to make herself useful enough to keep, but unremarkable enough to forget. The birthmark on her wrist, a perfect crescent moon in silvery white against her brown skin, she kept hidden beneath long sleeves and careful movements. Her mother had warned her about that mark in her dreams, or perhaps in her memories. Never let them see it, little moon. Never let them know what you are. Dahlia didn't know what she was. She only knew that the mark was dangerous, and that hiding was survival. But pregnancy had made her clumsy. "You're slower than usual," Marta the head cook had observed 3 weeks ago, her eyes sharp despite her age. "And greener in the mornings. Who's the father?" There was no father, not in the way Marta meant. There had been a man, a traveling merchant who had stayed at the compound for a week and looked at Dahlia like she was a person instead of furniture. He had touched her gently, whispered sweet promises about taking her away, and then vanished in the night without a word. Dahlia had been left with nothing but a swelling belly and the sour knowledge that kindness was just another kind of trap. "No one important," Dahlia had answered, and Marta had snorted. "No one ever is. Keep working. A pregnant servant is still a servant." So Dahlia had kept working. She'd hidden her growing belly beneath loose aprons and powered through the nausea, scrubbing pots until her knuckles cracked and hauling water until her back screamed. The baby grew despite everything, a stubborn, fierce little presence that kicked at her ribs during the quiet hours and made her believe, foolishly, that something good might actually survive in this place. Then came the reaching. It was a simple thing, stupid in retrospect. Elder Mortis wanted honey for his tea, and the honey pot sat on the highest shelf of the pantry, pushed there by someone taller than Dahlia. She had stretched up on her toes, her arm extended to its limit, and her sleeve had slipped down to her elbow. The crescent moon birthmark glowed silver in the pantry's dim light. Caspian Ravencrest, passing by the open door, had frozen mid-step. His eyes had fixed on the mark with the intensity of a wolf scenting blood, and Dahlia's heart had stopped beating entirely. "Well," he had said, his voice soft with a terrible delight. "After all these years, after we thought the line was finally dead." Dahlia had run. She'd made it 3 days. 3 days of hiding in the forest, stealing food from camps, pressing her back against trees and praying to gods she didn't believe in. 3 days of feeling her baby kick and promising, over and over, that she would find them somewhere safe. But Caspian knew the forest better than she did. He had hunted in these woods since before she was born, tracking prey both animal and human, and in the end, he had found her at the river just as she was trying to cross. The Moonfire Queens were supposed to be extinct, he had said, almost conversationally, as he dragged her toward the water. "Your mother was the last, and I killed her myself, cut her throat and burned her body and scattered the ashes. But somehow," his fingers had tangled in her hair, yanking her head back, "somehow she managed to hide you away before I found her. Gave birth in secret, left you with the cult, and ran. I caught up with her 3 months later." "I don't know what you're talking about." Dahlia's voice had come out as a whisper, her hands pressed protectively over her belly. "I'm just a kitchen servant. I'm nobody." "You're the last of a bloodline that nearly destroyed our kind." Caspian had smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Dahlia had ever seen. "Your child would carry the prophecy, the moon-born queen who will unite the pacts and bring down the old orders. Did you think we would let that happen? Did you think I hunted your mother for sport?" Then his hands had closed around her throat, and the river had swallowed her whole. Dahlia woke to warmth. For a long moment she didn't understand. Her entire life had been cold, cold stone floors beneath her sleeping mat, cold water for washing, cold indifference from everyone around her. But now she lay wrapped in something soft that smelled of pine and wood smoke. her body heavy with a bone-deep exhaustion that made even breathing feel like effort. Her hand moved to her stomach before she was fully conscious, panic flaring through her chest. But the baby kicked back, a strong flutter of movement that made Dahlia's eyes fill with unexpected tears. Alive. They were both alive. She's waking. The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and masculine. Dahlia forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim candlelight that seemed far too bright. She was in a bed, an actual bed, with pillows and blankets and sheets that felt like clouds against her skin. The room around her was larger than the entire servants' quarters back at the compound, with stone walls hung with tapestries and a fire crackling in an enormous hearth. Easy. A different voice now, feminine and gentle. A woman's face swam into view, middle-aged, kind-eyed, with gray streaking through dark hair. You've been through quite an ordeal. Don't try to move too quickly. Dahlia's throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. Where? The word came out as a croak, barely audible. Where am I? Ashford Castle. The woman pressed a cup to Dahlia's lips, and she drank gratefully. Water, clean and cold. Nothing like the muddy river that had tried to steal her life. His Majesty's personal physician has been tending you. The baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, good movement. You're both going to be all right. His Majesty. The title triggered a memory. Golden eyes, warm arms, a voice promising safety. Dahlia tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate, and she fell back against the pillows with a gasp of pain. You have 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising on your throat, and you nearly died of hypothermia. The woman's voice was firm, but not unkind. You will rest, whether you want to or not. The man who... Dahlia's voice broke. The man who tried to... escaped. This from the deep male voice she'd heard first. A man stepped into her line of sight, tall and broad-shouldered with a warrior's build, his face weathered but not unkind. Slipped away in the chaos while the king was pulling you from the water. The hunters lost his trail at the mountain pass. Dahlia's heart stuttered. Alpha King? The woman and the man exchanged a glance that Dahlia couldn't interpret. You're in the territory of King Nikolai Ashford, the woman said slowly, watching Dahlia's face. The most powerful alpha in 3 kingdoms. He found you in the river and brought you here himself. The Alpha King. She had been saved by the Alpha King. Dahlia closed her eyes, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. In the cult, they had spoken of the Ashford King as a monster, a tyrant who conquered packs and crushed dissent with iron claws. But a monster wouldn't have pulled a pregnant servant from a freezing river. A monster wouldn't have carried her to safety in his own arms. Would he? The door to the chamber swung open, and every wolf in the room snapped to attention. Dahlia forced her eyes open again, her heart pounding against her damaged ribs, and met the gaze of the man who had saved her. He was tall. That was her first coherent thought, the only one that managed to form before everything else dissolved into chaos. He filled the doorway with an easy authority, dark hair swept back from a face that was handsome in the way of mountains and storms. Not soft, not pretty, but compelling in its stark planes and sharp edges. His eyes caught the firelight, warm as sunlit amber, bright with an intensity that made Dahlia feel like he was seeing through her skin to the bones beneath. Those eyes met hers, and the world stopped. Warmth flooded Dahlia's chest, sudden and overwhelming, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her breath caught, her heart lurched. Deep in her mind, something stirred that she had never felt before. Something ancient and instinctive that recognized this man with a certainty that defied all reason. The king went absolutely still. His pupils flared, the gold of his irises brightening to molten amber. His breath caught sharply, audibly, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening, but involuntary, possessive, primal. His hands clenched at his sides, and Dahlia saw his jaw tighten with the effort of holding himself in place. Mate. The word rose from somewhere deep inside her, from the wolf she had never known she possessed, the heritage her mother had never lived to explain. Mate. He's our mate. No, that was impossible. She was a servant, a runaway, a pregnant nobody with a bounty on her head. Kings didn't claim servants. Kings didn't want damaged, desperate women carrying another man's child. This was a dream, or a delusion, or some cruel trick of her traumatized mind. But the warmth in her chest didn't fade, and the king's gaze, still locked with hers, held an expression that Dahlia couldn't name but couldn't deny. Recognition. Hunger. Something that looked terrifyingly like wonder. 3 heartbeats passed in weighted silence. 3 heartbeats where no one moved, where no one breathed, where the entire world seemed to narrow to the space between a servant's gray eyes and a king's golden ones. Then Nikolai Ashford, Alpha King of the Ashford Territories, took a single step toward her bed. "Leave us," he said, his voice rough. "All of you. Now." The servants fled like leaves before a winter wind. Dahlia heard their footsteps retreating down the corridor, heard the heavy oak door close behind them with a sound that seemed far too final. And then there was nothing but silence, and the crackling fire and the weight of the Alpha King's attention pressing down on her like a physical force. She should have been terrified. Every instinct forged in 19 years of servitude screamed at her to lower her eyes, to bow her head, to make herself small and unthreatening and invisible. But something stronger than fear held her frozen. Something that hummed beneath her skin like lightning trapped in glass. Something that made her wolf. Her wolf? When had she ever felt her wolf? Rise up and press against the inside of her ribs as if trying to reach him. Nikolai took another step toward the bed, then another. Each footfall seemed to echo through the chamber like a drumbeat, marking time in a rhythm Dahlia didn't understand but couldn't ignore. The warmth in her chest spread outward, flooding through her veins until even her fingertips tingled with it. She felt feverish and frozen at once, hyper-aware of every detail. The way the firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his black tunic, the barely contained tension in every line of his body. He stopped at the foot of her bed, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough that his scent washed over her. Pine and wood smoke, and something deeper. Something wild and masculine that made her wolf whine with recognition. His hands gripped the bedpost, knuckles white with the force of his restraint, and when he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel. "What is your name?" Such a simple question, such an ordinary thing to ask. But the way he asked it, like her answer mattered, like she was a person rather than a possession, made Dahlia's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Dahlia," she whispered. "Dahlia Stoneheart." Something flickered in his expression. Stoneheart. That's not a cult surname. It was my mother's name. Before. Before the cult. Before the captivity. Before everything. Dahlia had kept it hidden all these years, a secret rebellion she'd never dared speak aloud. Nikolai's jaw tightened. "Your mother. The woman that creature was raving about at the river. He was shouting about killing the last Moonfire queen before he fled." The words hit Dahlia like a blow. She had always known, somewhere deep in her heart, that her mother hadn't simply died in childbirth. The cult stories had never quite added up, and her dreams had been filled with too much blood, too much screaming, for her mother's death to have been natural. But hearing it confirmed, hearing that Caspian had murdered her mother with the same casual cruelty he'd tried to murder her. "I didn't know," she heard herself say. "I suspected, but I never." "Breathe." The command cut through her rising panic, sharp and somehow steadying. You're safe now. He can't hurt you here. Dahlia sucked in a shuddering breath, her hands pressing against her belly where the baby kicked and rolled, equally unsettled. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why did you save me? Why bring me here? I'm no one. You are not no one. The words rang through the chamber with an authority that made Dahlia's wolf sit up and take notice. Nikolai released the bedpost and moved to the side of her bed, and suddenly he was too close. Close enough that the heat of his body radiated against her skin, close enough that she could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. I have ruled these lands for 15 years, he said, his voice dropping to something low and intimate that made her shiver. I have commanded armies, defeated rivals, built a kingdom from the ashes of my father's failures. I have never once felt. He stopped, a muscle jumping in his jaw. His eyes, still locked with hers, blazed with an intensity that stole her breath. I have never felt what I felt the moment I pulled you from that river. Dahlia's heart hammered against her damaged ribs. I don't understand. No? He leaned closer, and the pine and smoke scent of him filled her lungs, made her dizzy with something she couldn't name. Your wolf doesn't recognize what this is? The warmth spreading through your chest, the pull that feels like gravity, the certainty that you know me even though we've never met? She should deny it. She should lie, protect herself, retreat into the safety of pretending she felt nothing. But something stirred in her chest. That presence she'd glimpsed at the river. The wolf she'd never been taught to recognize. It pressed against her consciousness, tentative at first, then stronger, responding to the call of his wolf like a flower turning towards sunlight. Mate, Dahlia breathed, and the word felt like both salvation and doom. Nikolai's pupils dilated, the amber of his irises brightening to molten intensity. A growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening but possessive, primal, approving. He reached toward her face, and Dahlia's breath caught, every nerve in her body straining toward his touch, but his hand stopped an inch from her cheek. You're injured, he said, and the words seemed to cost him. Frightened, carrying a child. I will not. Another rough sound escaped him, half growl and half groan. I will not touch you without your permission, no matter what my wolf demands. The restraint in his voice, the visible effort it took for him to hold himself back. It was so unexpected that Dahlia didn't know how to respond. In the cult, men took what they wanted. Power meant entitlement. The fact that this king, this alpha who could command armies with a word, was fighting his own instincts to give her a choice. You saved my life, she whispered. That doesn't mean I own it. His hand dropped to his side, and she saw his fingers curl into a fist. You will stay here. You will heal. And when you are strong enough, you will decide what you want. Not what you think you owe me. Not what you believe is expected. What you want. Dahlia stared at him, trying to reconcile this man with everything she had been taught about alphas, about kings, about power. He stood there like a warrior god, every inch of him radiating dominance and authority, and yet he was asking for nothing, demanding nothing, offering her something no one had ever offered before: agency. I don't know what I want, she admitted, the words barely audible. I've never been allowed to want anything. Something dark and dangerous flickered in Nikolai's expression. Then you will learn. He stepped back from the bed, putting distance between them that Dahlia felt like a physical loss. Rest now. My physician will attend you. When you're stronger, we will speak again. He turned toward the door, and Dahlia's wolf howled in protest at the distance growing between them. Before she could stop herself, her voice rang out. The man at the river, Caspian, he said something before he fled. About my bloodline. About a prophecy. Nikolai paused with his hand on the door handle. He didn't turn around, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly as if fighting the urge to look back at her. I know who you are, Dahlia Stoneheart. His voice was soft now, almost gentle. Your mother was Queen Lysera of the Moonfire line, last of the moonborn rulers, which makes you— He did turn then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Which makes you far more than any kitchen slave. Rest. We have much to discuss when you are well. Then he was gone, and Dahlia was left alone with her thundering heart, and her stirring wolf, and the impossible, terrifying warmth that still bloomed in her chest like a flower-seeking sun. 3 nights later, Dahlia woke screaming. The nightmare had been the same one that haunted her since the river. Caspian's hands around her throat, black water filling her lungs, her baby's frantic kicks growing weaker as the cold crept in. She clawed her way to consciousness, gasping for air, her damaged ribs protesting every breath, her entire body drenched in cold sweat. Easy. Easy. You're safe. The voice came from beside her bed, deep and steady and somehow more effective than any nightmare at shocking her fully awake. Dahlia's eyes flew open, and she found herself staring at the Alpha King. Nikolai sat in a chair at her bedside, not lounging but upright, alert, as if he'd been keeping watch rather than sleeping. A book lay open in his lap, and a single candle burned on the table beside him, casting warm light across his sharp features. He wore no crown, no formal attire, just a simple white shirt unlaced at the throat and dark trousers, his feet bare against the cold stone floor. You— Dahlia's voice came out cracked and hoarse. She swallowed hard, tried again. What are you doing here? Reading. He lifted the book slightly, as if offering evidence. I find I cannot sleep in my own chambers. Not when I know you're here, recovering, vulnerable. My wolf refuses to settle unless I'm nearby. The admission was so honest, so unexpectedly raw, that Dahlia didn't know how to respond. She had expected a king to be controlled, to guard his weaknesses, to never admit that anything, or anyone, had power over him. But Nikolai spoke of his wolf's demands as easily as discussing the weather, offering the information without expectation or demand. You've been here all night? For the last 3 nights. He set the book aside and reached for something on the table. A cup, she realized, steam curling from its surface. Since you returned to consciousness, you've had nightmares every night. The physician says it's normal after what you experienced. I wanted— He paused, and she saw something vulnerable flicker across his face before he controlled it. I wanted you to have someone here when you woke. Dahlia's hands were trembling. She lifted them to her face, pressing her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. No one had ever cared if she woke afraid. No one had ever thought her comfort was worth sacrificing their own sleep for. Here. Nikolai's voice was gentle now, careful in a way that made her chest ache. Warm tea with honey and chamomile. It helps. He held the cup out to her, and Dahlia lowered her hands to take it, their fingers brushing in the transfer. The brief contact sent a jolt of warmth through her entire body, made her wolf press forward with a low sound of longing. She saw Nikolai's jaw tighten, saw the flash of gold in his eyes, but he pulled back immediately, giving her space. The tea was perfect. Not too hot, not too sweet. Exactly what her raw throat needed. Dahlia drank in small sips, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, and gradually her trembling eased. Do you want to talk about it? Nikolai asked. The nightmare? Dahlia shook her head. It's always the same. The river. The cold. Feeling my baby's kicks getting weaker and knowing I couldn't save her. Her? The question made Dahlia look up. Nikolai was watching her with quiet intensity, and there was something in his expression, a softness, a curiosity, that made her feel like what she said mattered. I don't know for certain, she admitted. I've just always thought of the baby as a girl. When she kicks, when she moves, it feels like a daughter. A daughter? Nikolai's voice was strange, thick with an emotion Dahlia couldn't identify. The prophecy speaks of a moonborn queen, a daughter of the last Moonfire Bloodline who will unite the packs under a single banner. Dahlia's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective and fierce. Is that why you're helping me? Because of the prophecy? Because my child might be useful to your kingdom? The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she couldn't take them back. She had learned too well that kindness always had a price, that help always came with strings attached. If Nikolai wanted her for her bloodline, for her child's potential power, she needed to know now, before she let herself hope for anything more. But Nikolai didn't react with anger or offense. Instead, he leaned forward in his chair, bringing his face closer to the candlelight, and Dahlia saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. "I am helping you," he said quietly, "because a man was trying to murder a pregnant woman in a freezing river, and I have enough honor to find that unacceptable. I am keeping you here because my wolf recognized you as mate the moment our eyes met, and no amount of logic or duty will convince him to let you go. And I am sitting beside your bed at 3 in the morning because the thought of you waking alone and afraid makes something in my chest hurt in ways I don't fully understand." Dahlia stared at him. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, and more intimate than any touch. "I don't know anything about the prophecy," Nikolai continued. "I don't care about bloodlines or politics or the potential power your daughter might wield. I care that you're here, that you're healing, that you're alive. Everything else, the mate bond, the politics, the future, we can figure out together. If you want to. If you want to." There it was again. That offering of choice, that space for her to decide. Dahlia felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "I don't know how to trust," she whispered. "I've never been able to trust anyone, not the servants I grew up with, not the masters who owned us, not the one man who ever showed me kindness and then disappeared without a word." Nikolai's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding in his gaze. "Then I will earn it," he said simply. "For as long as it takes. I am a patient man, Dahlia Stoneheart. And you are worth the wait." He didn't touch her. He didn't move closer or make demands or try to press his advantage while she was vulnerable and emotional. He simply sat there, steady and present, offering the cup when she needed more tea and silence when she needed to think. Eventually, Dahlia's eyes grew heavy. The nightmare's grip had loosened, replaced by a fragile sense of safety she didn't entirely trust but couldn't deny. She set the empty cup aside and slid back down against the pillows, her hand still resting over her belly. "Rest now," Nikolai said softly. "I'll be here when you wake." Dahlia wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't need to stay, that she was fine. But her eyes were already closing, and his presence beside her felt like a warmth she didn't want to give up. "Thank you," she murmured, the words slurring with exhaustion. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the quiet rustle of pages as the king of the realm returned to his book, keeping watch over a kitchen slave while she dreamed. A week after her arrival at Ashford Castle, Dahlia was finally well enough to leave her chambers. The physician, a kind-eyed beta named Helena who had tended Dahlia with brisk efficiency and occasional dry humor, had declared her ribs on the mend and her strength returning. The baby continued to thrive, kicking with increasing enthusiasm as Dahlia's body healed, and the bruises on her throat had faded from dark purple to a sickly yellow that could almost be hidden beneath a high collar. "His Majesty has arranged for gowns to be delivered," Helena said, as she helped Dahlia bathe for the first time since the river. "Nothing too formal. He said you should be comfortable, not displayed. But if you feel up to it, there's a midday meal in the Great Hall. It would be good for you to be seen." "Seen?" Dahlia echoed, uncertain. "By whom?" Helena's expression flickered with something Dahlia couldn't read. The court, my lady. The nobles, the advisors, the pack members who serve the crown. Word has spread that the king rescued a woman from the river. A woman he brought to his own castle and has been personally attending every night. There is speculation. Dahlia's cheeks flushed with heat. Of course there was speculation. A king didn't spend every night at a stranger's bedside without tongues wagging. She should have realized. Should have thought about how it looked. Should have... Stop. Helena's voice was firm but kind. Whatever you're thinking, stop. You've done nothing wrong. The king has done nothing wrong. He is an alpha who found his mate while she was being drowned by a madman, and his wolf has been in protective overdrive ever since. Anyone who finds fault with that is a fool. His mate. The words felt strange in Dahlia's mouth. I'm a kitchen slave carrying another man's child. How can I possibly be a king's mate? Helena paused in her work, looking at Dahlia with an expression that was almost maternal. The mate bond doesn't care about status, my lady. It doesn't care about bloodlines or politics or circumstance. When a wolf recognizes their true mate, nothing else matters. Trust me, I've seen it before. And I've never seen King Nikolai look at anyone the way he looks at you. Dahlia didn't know how to respond to that. She allowed Helena to dress her in a gown of deep blue velvet that somehow fit perfectly despite her swollen belly, and she followed the physician through the castle's winding corridors with her heart pounding against her healing ribs. The great hall was enormous, a soaring space of gray stone and high windows that let in the pale winter light. Long tables lined the room, filled with wolves in various stages of eating and conversation. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the king's table, and there, in the center of it all, was Nikolai. He saw her the moment she entered. Dahlia felt his gaze like a physical touch, warm and heavy, tracking her progress across the hall. She saw his posture shift, saw him start to rise from his chair as if drawn by invisible strings, and then she heard the whisper, "Is that her?" A woman's voice, sharp with disdain. The cult whore the king dragged from the river? Dahlia's steps faltered. She shouldn't have been surprised. She shouldn't have expected anything different. These were nobles, pack members, wolves who had probably never scrubbed a pot or bowed their heads to a master's cruelty. Of course they would look at her and see only what she had been. Look at her belly. Pregnant with some other man's bastard, and she's dining at the king's table? A second voice now, male and mocking. The Alpha King has finally lost his mind. The words cut deeper than they should have. Dahlia's hands moved to her belly, protective and desperate, and she felt her wolf, still so new, still so uncertain, cower beneath the weight of their judgment. She should turn back. She should return to her chamber and hide, the way she'd hidden all her life. She was a fool to think she could walk into a noble hall and be treated as anything other than what she was. But before she could move, before she could flee, a voice cut through the hall like winter wind. I will have silence. Nikolai hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. The words carried the full weight of an alpha's authority, and every wolf in the hall went instantly still. The whispers died. The mocking laughter choked off. Even the nobles who had been mid-bite froze with their forks halfway to their mouths. The king rose from his chair and descended from the dais, his movements deliberate and measured. The crowd parted before him like water before a great stone, and Dahlia stood frozen, watching him approach with her heart in her throat. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the golden fire burning in his eyes, the controlled fury that barely contained in every line of his body. He didn't touch her. He never touched her without permission, but he turned to face the hall, positioning himself beside her like a wall against the storm. The woman before you, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall, is Dahlia Stoneheart, daughter of Queen Lysara of the Moonfire line. Her bloodline is older than every family in this room, purer than every lineage present, more royal than any claim any of you might make. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dahlia heard her mother's name spoken in shocked whispers, heard the shift as nobles reassessed her with new eyes. She was held captive by a cult that slaughtered her mother for daring to exist, Nikolai continued. She was hunted like an animal for the mark she carries, the crescent moon of the Moonfire Queens. And when she was caught, when a madman tried to murder her son and her unborn child in a frozen river, I pulled her from the water and brought her here, to my castle, under my protection. His gaze swept the hall, and Dahlia saw nobles flinch away from the fury in his eyes. I have heard the whispers, he said softly, dangerously. I know what some of you have been calling her in the corridors and the shadows. So let me be very clear. Anyone who disrespects Dahlia Stoneheart disrespects me. Anyone who questions her worth questions my judgment. And anyone— His voice dropped to a growl that made the very stones vibrate. Anyone who speaks ill of the child she carries will answer to my claws. Is that understood? Silence. Absolute, total, terrified silence. I said, Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty. The response came from 100 throats at once, a chorus of submission that rang through the hall. Nikolai nodded once, sharply, and then turned to Dahlia. The fury in his eyes softened as he looked at her, replaced by something warmer, something gentler. Come, he said quietly, offering his arm. There is a place for you at my table. Dahlia stared at him. She saw the nobles watching, saw their expressions shifting from shock to speculation to something that looked almost like respect. She had walked into this hall a kitchen slave, and with a few words, Nikolai had transformed her into something else entirely. Not because of what she could give him, not because of the prophecy or the bloodline or the child in her belly, but because someone had disrespected her, and he had refused to allow it. Her wolf pressed forward, warm and certain, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this castle, Dahlia let herself reach for him. Her fingers curled around his offered arm, and the warmth that flooded through her at the contact made her breath catch. Nikolai's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing gold for a brief moment, but he didn't pull away. He simply guided her through the parted crowd, up to the dais, to the empty chair beside his own. As she sat, as the meal resumed around them with considerably more subdued conversation, Dahlia felt something shift in her chest. The walls she had spent 19 years building, the barriers that had kept everyone at a safe distance, they were developing cracks. Small ones, hairline fractures that let in light she hadn't known she was missing. Nikolai leaned close, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Are you all right? Dahlia looked at him. This king, this alpha, this mate she had never expected and still didn't know if she deserved. I don't know, she admitted. But I think I might be starting to believe that I could be. Something like hope flickered across Nikolai's face. He didn't smile. She was beginning to understand that he rarely smiled, that his expressions were controlled and careful, but his hand found hers beneath the table, a brief press of warmth that was there and gone before anyone could see. That's enough, he said quietly. For now, that's more than enough. Dahlia turned to her meal, her damaged ribs aching less than they had that morning, her wolf settling into something that felt almost like contentment. She was still afraid. She was still uncertain. But for the first time in her life, she was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be either of those things alone. The days that followed the Great Hall incident settled into something Dahlia had never experienced before, a rhythm. A pattern of safety that felt foreign against her skin, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. She woke each morning in the soft bed that was beginning to feel less like a trap and more like a sanctuary. She ate meals that appeared without her having to cook them, served by attendants who looked at her with curiosity rather than contempt. She walked the castle corridors with her hand resting on her growing belly, and guards nodded to her as she passed. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. She didn't know which feeling was more accurate, so she let herself feel both. Marta came to check on her every morning, the older healer's hands gentle as she examined the fading bruises, the healing ribs, the steady heartbeat of the child within. Strong, Marta would say, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile but came close. Both of you. Stronger than you have any right to be, given what you've survived. Dahlia would nod, accept the tea Marta pressed into her hands, and try not to think about the river. About the cold. About Caspian Ravencrest's face twisted with righteous fury as he held her under the water and waited for her to die. She failed at that particular effort more often than she succeeded. The castle itself seemed determined to welcome her, in its ancient stone-walled way. She discovered a library on the 3rd floor, its shelves heavy with books she had never been allowed to read. She found a garden courtyard where late autumn roses still bloomed in defiance of the coming cold. She learned the names of servants who looked at her without judgment: Elena, who brought her meals; Thomas, who guarded her door at night; young Peter, who couldn't have been more than 12, and who seemed utterly fascinated by the idea that someone with royal Moonfire blood would actually speak to him. And through it all, there was Nikolai. The Alpha King didn't hover. He didn't press. He simply appeared. In the library when she was reading, settling into a chair across from hers with his own book and his own silence. In the garden when she walked among the roses, matching his pace to hers without comment. At meals where he sat beside her and made quiet observations about the food, the weather, the political machinations of his nobles. Anything that might coax a response from her lips. He was courting her, Dahlia realized with a start that nearly made her drop her teacup one afternoon. Not demanding. Not claiming. Courting her like she was someone worth winning rather than something to be taken. Her wolf approved. Her wolf approved, with an intensity that made Dahlia's head spin, pressing forward every time Nikolai entered a room, flooding her with warmth and want, and a bone-deep certainty that this male was hers, and she was his, and why couldn't she just accept that? Because she had learned, in 19 years of survival, that nothing good came without cost. Because the compound had taught her that safety was an illusion and kindness was a trap. Because Caspian Ravencrest had seemed kind, too, once, before he had dragged her to the river's edge and tried to wash her bloodline from the world. She was thinking about him, about Caspian, about the cold, about the way his eyes had blazed with conviction as he pushed her under, when a traveling healer arrived at the castle gates. Dahlia was in the garden when Peter found her, the young servant's face bright with gossip. "My lady, have you met the new healer yet? The one from the Eastern Territories? He's been here a few days now, and Marta says he knows remedies even she hasn't heard of." Something cold slithered through Dahlia's chest. She pressed her hand to her belly, where her child kicked in sudden agitation, and told herself she was being foolish. The Eastern Territories were vast. Thousands of healers must practice their craft in those lands. The odds that this particular healer had any connection to her past were impossibly small. But her wolf disagreed. Her wolf pressed against her consciousness with a warning growl, hackles raised, teeth bared at a threat Dahlia couldn't see. "What's his name?" she asked, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. Peter's young face scrunched in thought. "Casper, I think?" "He's tall," Marta said. Very pale with light eyes, arrived alone from the Eastern Territories. Something cold and certain settled in Dahlia's gut. Her wolf surged forward with a snarl of recognition, not at a description, but at the wrongness that had been prickling at the edge of her awareness for days. A familiar scent in the corridors. A shadow that moved like a predator pretending to be prey. When did he arrive? She asked, though she already knew the answer. 3 days ago, my lady. The world tilted. The garden spun around her, roses blurring into smears of red and green and gold. Dahlia grabbed for the stone bench beside her, her fingers scraping against cold granite as she fought to stay upright. Caspian was here. Caspian was in the castle. Caspian, who had murdered her mother and tried to murder her 2 weeks past, had walked through the gates of Nikolai's stronghold, wearing a healer's robes and a false name. My lady? Peter's voice seemed to come from very far away. My lady, are you all right? Should I fetch Marta? Should I— The king! Dahlia managed, her throat tight with terror. Find the king. Tell him I need him, now, please. Peter ran. Dahlia sank onto the bench, her legs no longer capable of supporting her weight, and wrapped her arms around her belly as if she could shield her child from the danger that had followed her across miles and rivers, and the desperate hope that she might finally be safe. He had found her. Of course he had found her. The prophecy that marked her bloodline had haunted the Ravencrest family for generations. The Moonfire Queens would rise again, and when they did, the old powers would burn away the corruption that had festered in the shadows. Caspian's grandfather had hunted her grandmother. Caspian's father had hunted her mother. And Caspian himself had spent his entire adult life searching for the last daughter of the Moonfire line, the one who had been hidden in a cult compound and forgotten by everyone except those who wanted her dead. She should have known that a river wouldn't stop him. She should have known that nothing would stop him, not until she was dead and her child was dead, and the prophecy was nothing but ash scattered on the wind. Footsteps thundered across stone. Dahlia looked up to find Nikolai striding toward her, his face a mask of barely controlled fury, his eyes blazing with golden light that spoke to the wolf barely leashed beneath his skin. Peter said you needed me. His voice was rough, strained, as if the words were being torn from him against his will. He said something was wrong. Are you hurt? Is it the child? Caspian, Dahlia breathed. The healer. The one who arrived today. It's Caspian Ravencrest. Nikolai went very, very still. He's wearing a different name, she continued, the words tumbling from her lips in a rush of fear and desperation. Calling himself Casper now. But my wolf recognized his scent, the same scent from the river, from the hands that held me under. He's dyed his hair, changed his bearing, but it's him. He's here, Nikolai. He's in your castle, and he's dead. Nikolai's voice was flat, cold, absolute. The bastard who escaped that night, the one my hunters have been tracking for weeks, walked right through my gates. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He will not leave this castle alive. He turned, already calling for his guards, already issuing orders in a tone that brooked no argument. But Dahlia caught his arm, her fingers wrapping around his wrist with a strength that surprised them both. Wait, she said. Please, you don't understand. He's been doing this for years. Hunting my bloodline, infiltrating, poisoning minds against us. If you confront him now, publicly, he'll have a plan. He always has a plan. He'll say I'm paranoid or jealous, or trying to eliminate a rival healer who might expose some flaw in my pregnancy. He'll twist everything until the truth is buried so deep no one can find it. Nikolai stared at her. His chest heaved with the effort of restraining his wolf, his eyes flickering between gold and their usual dark brown. But he listened. He actually listened, when every line of his body screamed that he wanted to tear through the castle until he found the man who had tried to drown his mate. Then, what do you suggest? He asked, his voice strained but steady. Dahlia took a breath. Another. She had spent 19 years surviving by thinking 3 steps ahead, by anticipating danger before it arrived, by being too clever to catch and too insignificant to notice. Caspian had underestimated her at the river. He had assumed she would be easy prey, a frightened girl with no power and no protectors. He had been wrong then. She would make certain he was wrong now. "We watch him," she said slowly, the plan taking shape even as she spoke. "We let him think he's succeeded, that his disguise is working, that no one suspects. And when he makes his move, because he will make a move, he has to, he can't let me or my child survive, we'll be ready." Nikolai's jaw tightened. "You want me to allow the man who tried to murder you to walk freely through my castle? I want you to help me destroy him completely." Dahlia met his eyes, and something fierce and certain blazed to life in her chest, something that felt like the warmth of her wolf, and the heat of the bond, and the first stirring of a power she had spent her whole life hiding. Not just his body, Nikolai, his reputation, his credibility, his entire network of lies. If we kill him now, quietly, his followers will make him a martyr. They'll say the Moonfire witch murdered an innocent healer to hide her corruption. But if we expose him first, if we prove what he is and what he's done, then we destroy not just him, but everything he built. Nikolai's eyes glittered with understanding, with respect. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about nothing else since the river." Dahlia's hand dropped from his wrist, and she curled it against her belly where her child still kicked in agitation. "I knew he wouldn't stop. I knew he would find me eventually. I hoped I would have more time." Something shifted in Nikolai's expression. The cold fury that had gripped him since he'd arrived in the garden softened, replaced by something warmer, something that made Dahlia's breath catch in her throat. "You won't face him alone," he said quietly. "Whatever plan we make, whatever trap we set, you will not face him alone. I need you to understand that." Dahlia looked at this king, this alpha, this mate who had pulled her from a frozen river and given her shelter and defended her honor before his entire court. Her wolf pressed forward, warm and certain, and for once Dahlia didn't push her back. "I'm starting to," she admitted. The days that followed were an exercise in controlled terror. Dahlia watched Caspian, Casper, as he called himself now, move through the castle with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He treated patients in the healing wing, offered advice to Marta that she accepted with the wariness of a wolf scenting danger she couldn't name, and smiled at everyone he passed with a warmth that made Dahlia's skin crawl. He was good at this. He had spent years perfecting his disguise, learning to wear kindness like a mask, learning to seem helpful and harmless and trustworthy. The nobles who had whispered cult horror behind Dahlia's back welcomed Casper the healer with open arms, eager for his remedies and his charm and his willingness to listen to their petty complaints. She saw him watching her, sometimes. When he thought no one was looking, his pale eyes would find her across a crowded room, and the mask would slip just enough for her to glimpse the hatred beneath. He blamed her for surviving. He blamed her for the child in her belly, the child who represented everything his family had spent generations trying to prevent. And he was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he had started at the river. Dahlia watched him watching her, and she felt something new taking root in her chest. Not just fear, though the fear was still there, a cold knot that never quite dissolved. But alongside it, something hotter, something that burned. Anger. She was angry that he had taken her mother from her before she was old enough to remember her face. She was angry that he had stolen her childhood, that his family's obsession with the Moonfire prophecy had condemned her to grow up in a compound where she was nothing but a servant and a secret. She was angry that he had tried to murder her child, her daughter. She was certain it was a daughter. She could feel it in her bones, simply because of what that child might one day become. And she was angry at herself for all the years she had spent hiding, for all the power she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed, for believing, on some fundamental level, that she deserved the fear and the silence and the smallness of the life she had been given. The night terrors came less frequently now, but when they did, Nikolai was always there. He seemed to have an uncanny sense for when she would wake, gasping and trembling, and she would find him sitting in the chair beside her bed, a cup of warm tea already prepared, his presence a steady anchor in the darkness. He never asked what she dreamed about. He never demanded explanations or offered empty reassurances. He simply waited, patient and still, until her breathing steadied and her hands stopped shaking. One night, the fourth or fifth since Caspian's arrival, Dahlia had lost count. She reached for him. She didn't plan it. One moment she was sitting up in bed, her heart racing from images of dark water and grasping hands, and the next her fingers were curled around his wrist, the same way she had grabbed him in the garden when she told him about Caspian. Nikolai went very still. His eyes met hers in the dim light of the dying fire, and she saw his pupils dilate, saw gold flicker at the edges of his irises. "I'm tired of being afraid," she whispered. "I know. I'm tired of waking up wondering if today is the day he makes his move, if today is the day my luck runs out. I know. I'm tired of—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "I'm tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of expecting everything good to be ripped away because that's all I've ever known. I'm tired of being too scared to want things, Nikolai. To want this." She tightened her grip on his wrist, and she felt his pulse jump beneath her fingers, felt the way his breathing changed, going shallow and uneven. "Dahlia." His voice was rough, strained. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's the point." She met his eyes, and the warmth that flooded through her at the contact made her gasp. Her wolf surged forward, not demanding but encouraging, pressing against her consciousness with something that felt like finally. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop pushing away the one person who's made me feel safe since I escaped that compound. I want—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The words tangled in her throat, too big and too terrifying to speak aloud. But Nikolai understood. Of course he understood. The bond between them thrummed with shared feeling, and she saw her own desperate wanting reflected in the depths of his gaze. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, his fingers impossibly gentle against her skin. She leaned into the touch, and warmth spread through her like sunlight, like honey, like coming home to a place she had never been but had always longed for. "We don't have to rush anything," he said quietly. "Whatever you want, whatever you need, we go at your pace. Always." Dahlia closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she didn't try to explain them. Some things were too large for words. "Stay," she whispered. "Tonight. Just stay." Nikolai's breath caught. His hand trembled against her cheek, the only sign of how much her request affected him. "Always?" he said again. He didn't climb into the bed. He didn't push for more than she was offering. He simply moved his chair closer, close enough that she could keep her hand wrapped around his wrist, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him like a fire on a cold night. And when sleep finally pulled her under again, the nightmares stayed away. Caspian cornered her 3 days later. She had gone to the gardens, her gardens now. She had started to think of them that way. The roses and the stone benches and the quiet corners where she could breathe without feeling watched. But she wasn't alone. She knew before she even saw him that something was wrong, the hair on the back of her neck rising, her wolf pressing forward with a growl of warning. He stood beside the fountain at the garden's center, his healer's robes pristine white, his pale eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Up close, she could see past the dyed hair and the carefully constructed mannerisms, the predator beneath the healer's mask. "Little Dahlia," he said softly. Did you really think I wouldn't find you? Dahlia stood very still, her heart hammered against her ribs, her child kicking frantically as if sensing the danger that had found them. I know who you are, she said, and she was proud of how steady her voice sounded. I know what you did to my mother, what you tried to do to me. Caspian smiled. It was the smile she remembered from the river, the smile of a man who believed himself righteous, who saw murder as a holy calling. Your mother was weak, he said, taking a step toward her. She begged, at the end, begged for mercy, for her child's life, as if the Moonfire corruption could ever deserve mercy. Another step. But you survived the river. That surprised me. Dahlia held her ground. Her wolf snarled inside her, fangs bared, demanding blood. I've been watching you, Caspian continued, watching the nobles whisper, watching the doubt grow. You've felt it, haven't you? The way some of them look at you when they think you can't see? His smile widened. This castle isn't the sanctuary you think it is. If you're going to kill me, why not do it now? Dahlia asked. No witnesses? No one to stop you? Caspian's eyes flickered to her belly, then back to her face. Because death is too easy. Too quick. Your bloodline has survived for centuries by making martyrs of themselves. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the herbs on his skin, the faint undertone of something bitter beneath. I want something more permanent. I want your name to become a curse. I want wolves to spit when they speak of the Moonfire Queens. His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist, right over the crescent moon birthmark. Tomorrow night, he whispered. You'll understand. Dahlia wrenched her wrist free, stepping back. Her skin burned where he'd touched her, but the pain brought clarity instead of fear. She looked at this man who had spent his entire life hunting her bloodline. This man who had murdered her mother and tried to murder her, and would stop at nothing to see her child dead before it drew its first breath. And the fear that had lived in her chest for 19 years cracked. Not shattered. Not yet, but cracked, letting something else through. Something hot and bright and terrifying in its power. You think I don't know what you're planning? She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, met his pale gaze with eyes that felt like they were burning from within. The feast tomorrow. The nobles already primed to suspect me. You'll make your move there, won't you? Try to turn them against me before I can defend myself. Something flickered in Caspian's expression. Surprise that she'd pieced it together, perhaps. Or irritation that she wasn't cowering. You think knowing will save you? I think you've underestimated me twice now. She took a step toward him, and she actually saw him flinch. The river didn't kill me. Your whispers haven't turned the king against me. And whatever you're planning for tomorrow? A laugh bubbled up from her throat, wild and fierce. I'm done hiding, Caspian. Done running. If you want to end my bloodline, you'll have to face me yourself. And you'll learn exactly why your ancestors feared the Moonfire Queens in the first place. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Dahlia's heart pounded. Her child kicked. Her wolf howled with triumph. Then Caspian's mask slipped back into place. The pleasant healer, the trusted advisor. But she'd seen what lay beneath. Tomorrow night, he said quietly, and walked away. His white robes billowed behind him like a shroud. Dahlia stood alone in the garden, her whole body trembling with fear and fury, and something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Tomorrow night, the feast. Caspian's plan, whatever it was, would unfold. And Dahlia would be ready. The day of the feast dawned gray and cold, autumn wind rattling the castle windows like restless spirits seeking entry. Dahlia had not slept. She had spent the night pacing her chambers, one hand pressed to her belly where her daughter kicked and rolled, the other tracing the carved symbols on the wooden box Marta had given her weeks ago. protection runes, moonfire sigils, the legacy of a bloodline that had survived centuries of persecution. She was done running from that legacy. When Marta arrived with her breakfast tray, the old healer took one look at Dahlia's face and set the food aside. "You've decided something," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." "Caspian came to me yesterday." Dahlia's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "In the garden. He told me his plan, to expose me at the feast tonight, to turn the nobles against me and have them do his killing for him." Marta's weathered face went pale. That fool. That arrogant, self-righteous fool. She gripped Dahlia's hands tightly. "We need to tell the king. He needs to know." "No." Dahlia shook her head. "If Nikolai confronts Caspian directly, it becomes a political battle. The nobles will question whether he's protecting me because I'm his mate or because I'm innocent. They'll wonder if the Alpha King has been compromised, corrupted by Moonfire magic." She met Marta's eyes with a calm certainty that surprised even herself. "This has to be my fight, my bloodline, my burden to lift." "Child, you're pregnant. You're not fully healed from what he did to you at the river." "I know." Dahlia smiled, and it was a warrior's smile, fierce and bright. "But I'm also not the girl who was too afraid to fight back. Not anymore." The hours until the feast passed with agonizing slowness. Dahlia bathed and dressed with care, choosing a gown of deep crimson that Nikolai had sent to her chambers, rich velvet that made her gray eyes look silver in the candlelight. She left her dark hair loose, flowing over her shoulders in waves that caught the firelight. Around her throat, she wore no jewelry. She wanted her neck bare, unmarked, a silent declaration of what she was. Unclaimed, but not unprotected. When she descended to the great hall, the feast was already in full celebration. Nobles from across the territory filled the long tables, their laughter and conversation echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. Servants moved between them with platters of roasted meats and flagons of wine. Candles flickered in iron chandeliers overhead, casting dancing shadows across the ancient tapestries that lined the walls. And there, at the head of the hall, sat Nikolai. He saw her the moment she appeared in the doorway. His golden eyes found hers across the crowded room, and Dahlia felt that now familiar warmth flood through her chest, the mate bond humming between them like a living thing, binding them together even across this distance. He started to rise, started to come to her, but she gave a tiny shake of her head. "Not yet. Trust me." Something flickered across his face. Concern, perhaps, or frustration at being held back. But he settled into his chair, watching her with those predator's eyes as she made her way through the crowd. The whispers started almost immediately. "That's her. The servant girl the king rescued. They say she was a kitchen slave in some cult compound. Moonfire blood. Can you imagine? I thought they were all dead." Dahlia kept her head high, her steps measured and sure. She felt the weight of their stares, felt the judgment and curiosity, and barely concealed hostility from some of the nobles. But she also felt her wolf prowling beneath her skin, calm and ready, and her daughter kicking against her palm as if offering encouragement. She had almost reached the dais when a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "My lords and ladies, if I might have your attention." Caspian Ravencrest stepped forward from the shadows near the great fireplace, his white healer's robes pristine, his pale eyes gleaming with righteous fervor. He had timed his entrance perfectly, waiting until Dahlia was visible to all, until every eye in the hall could see both predator and prey. "I have served this castle faithfully since my arrival," Caspian continued, his voice carrying with practiced ease. "I have tended your sick, healed your wounded, earned your trust, but tonight I must speak a truth that weighs heavily on my conscience." He turned, fixing Dahlia with a gaze that burned with hatred. "A truth about the woman your Alpha King has welcomed into his home." The hall went silent. Even the servants stopped moving, frozen in place by the tension that crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. Nikolai rose from his seat, his hands gripping the arms of his throne, his eyes flashing gold with barely contained rage. "Healer Ravencrest, you forget yourself." "No, Your Majesty." Caspian's smile was thin and cruel. "It is you who have forgotten. Forgotten the ancient laws that govern our kind. Forgotten the prophecies that warn us of destruction." He pointed at Dahlia, his finger trembling with fervor. "This woman carries the blood of the Moonfire Queens, the same bloodline that brought plague and devastation to our ancestors, the same power that will corrupt and destroy everything it touches." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dahlia saw fear flickering in some faces, suspicion in others. Caspian had done his work well. The seeds of doubt he'd planted were taking root. "She is pregnant with a prophecy child," Caspian pressed on, "a child whose power will tear this kingdom apart. She has bewitched your king, used dark magic to simulate a mate bond, and now she waits like a serpent in your midst for the moment to strike." "That's a lie." Dahlia stepped forward, and she was amazed at how steady her voice sounded, how calm she felt even as her heart raced. "Everything he's saying is a lie." Caspian's smile widened. "Is it? Then prove it. Let the nobles test you for dark magic. Let them examine your bloodline, your power. If you have nothing to hide, I have nothing to hide." Dahlia's chin lifted. "But I won't submit to tests designed to condemn me no matter the outcome. I know how your kind operates. Caspian Ravencrest. I know the trials your bloodline devised for my ancestors, tests rigged to ensure only one verdict." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the watching nobles. Some of them knew the history, knew how the Moonfire Queens had been persecuted, hunted, destroyed through trickery rather than fair combat. Caspian's pale eyes narrowed. "You see how she deflects? How she avoids the truth with clever words? This is exactly what the prophecies warned us about. The Moonfire corruption spreads through seduction and manipulation. The only manipulation here is yours?" Dahlia's voice grew stronger, fed by the anger that had been building in her chest all day. "You came to this castle under false pretenses. You've spent weeks whispering poison into willing ears, turning wolf against wolf. And why?" She took another step toward him, and she saw him flinch. Just barely, just enough. "Because you're afraid. Your entire bloodline has built its identity on hunting mine. Without Moonfire Queens to destroy, what are you? Nothing. A zealot without a cause." Caspian's composure cracked. "You dare." "I dare." Dahlia's voice rang through the hall. "I dare because you murdered my mother. You held me under freezing water and tried to drown me while I carried my child. And now you stand here, pretending to be righteous, pretending to protect these people, when all you've ever wanted is power." The nobles were riveted now, looking between Dahlia and Caspian with new eyes. Some of them remembered the healer's arrival, remembered how he'd insisted on treating certain wolves, how he'd spent so much time asking questions about the king's mysterious guest. "She lies," Caspian snarled, but his voice had lost its smooth assurance. "She's using her power to twist your perception." "Then let them feel for themselves." Dahlia closed her eyes, reached deep into the well of power that had always lived inside her, the birthright she'd been taught to suppress, to fear, to deny. Let them feel the truth. The moonfire rose within her like a tide of liquid silver. When Dahlia opened her eyes, the entire hall gasped. Her gray irises had transformed, blazing with pale light that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within her soul. Not dark, not corrupt, clean and bright as moonlight on fresh snow. "This is my power," she said softly, "the power of the Moonfire Queens, and it has never been about destruction. It has always been about light, about truth, about burning away corruption wherever it takes root." Caspian's face twisted with fury. "No, No, this is impossible. The prophecy said, the prophecy said my bloodline would end yours. Dahlia's voice was calm, almost gentle. You assumed that meant I would die trying. You never considered that it might mean I would succeed. Caspian moved faster than she'd expected. One moment he was standing near the fireplace sputtering in disbelief. The next he had drawn a silver blade from beneath his robes and was lunging toward her, his face contorted with desperate rage. If I can't turn them against you, I'll end you myself. Dahlia didn't flinch, didn't run, didn't try to dodge. She stepped forward. The moonfire that had been glowing in her eyes erupted outward, surrounding her in a cocoon of silver-white flame. When Caspian's blade struck that barrier, the metal shrieked and warped, turning red-hot in his grip. He screamed, dropping the weapon, staggering back with blistered hands. For a heartbeat, the hall held its breath. Then Caspian laughed, a wild, broken sound. He reached into his robes and pulled out a vial of dark liquid, crushing it in his ruined fist. Black smoke erupted around him, coalescing into something that moved with terrible purpose. You think you're the only one with ancient power? He snarled. My family has hunted yours for generations. We learned from every kill, adapted, prepared. The darkness lunged at Dahlia, and she felt cold, the same cold as the river, the cold of death reaching for her child. But she was not the same woman who had been dragged to that riverbank. The moonfire roared brighter, hotter, burning through the darkness like dawn scattering shadows. The flames reached for Caspian, hungry and alive, wrapping around his arms like burning serpents. His dark magic shattered against her light, and she saw the moment he understood. The moment his certainty finally broke. You can't! Caspian staggered backward, his robes catching fire. The prophecy said you'd be weak. You're pregnant, broken. You should be easy to kill. Dahlia advanced on him, and in that moment, she understood what her mother must have looked like in her final moments. Not weak, not begging, but blazing with power too terrible for men like Caspian to comprehend. The prophecy said I'd end your bloodline's curse, she said, her voice echoing strangely, layered with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You just assumed that meant I'd die doing it. The great doors of the hall burst open. Nikolai stood there, flanked by his guards, his entire body trembling with the effort of holding back his wolf. He'd felt her through the bond, felt her power awakening, felt her standing her ground. He'd trusted her, stayed back, let her fight her own battle. But he was here now, ready to finish what she'd started if she needed him. Dahlia met his eyes across the chaos of the hall. She saw the pride blazing in his gaze, the fierce love that burned alongside the territorial rage. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was what it meant to have a mate. Not someone who would fight your battles for you, but someone who would trust you to fight them yourself, and stand ready to catch you if you fell. She turned back to Caspian. He was on his knees now, the moonfire flames eating away at his robes, his skin beginning to char. His pale eyes had gone wide with terror, all the righteous certainty stripped away to reveal the coward beneath. Please, he gasped. Please, I was only doing what I believed was right. You murdered my mother. Dahlia's voice was cold as the river that had nearly claimed her. You tried to murder me. You planned to burn this entire castle and everyone in it if I didn't surrender to you. I can give you information. The others in my order, their plans. There are no others. Dahlia had seen the truth in the flames, read it in the corruption that burned through his veins. You killed them yourself, didn't you? Anyone who might have questioned your obsession. Anyone who might have shown mercy. Caspian's silence was answer enough. My mother begged you for mercy, Dahlia whispered. For my life, if not for hers. And you gave her none. The flames burned brighter. I am not my mother. Dahlia's power surged, the moonfire roaring higher, hotter. And I am done being merciful to those who would destroy everything I love. Caspian opened his mouth, perhaps to scream, perhaps to beg one final time. But the words never came. The silver-white flames engulfed him completely, burning so bright that the watching nobles had to shield their eyes. When the light finally faded, there was nothing left but ash, gray and fine as dust, already scattering in the draft from the open doors. Dahlia stood alone in the center of the great hall, breathing hard, the moonfire slowly dimming in her eyes. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion, but she didn't fall, wouldn't fall, not until she'd said what needed to be said. "My name is Dahlia Stoneheart," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "I am the last daughter of the Moonfire Queens, and I am not your enemy." She pressed a hand to her swollen belly, feeling her daughter kick strongly beneath her palm. "I don't want to rule you. I don't want to destroy you. I only want to live in peace, to raise my child without fear, to stand beside the mate the fates have given me." She looked at Nikolai, and even now, even exhausted and trembling, she felt that warmth flooding through her at the sight of him. "If you cannot accept that, if you choose to see me as a threat despite everything you've witnessed tonight, then I will leave. I will take my bloodline somewhere far from here, somewhere I won't be hunted." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled nobles. "But if you can accept me, not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as a woman who wants nothing more than a home, then I will spend the rest of my life protecting this territory and everyone in it." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then an elderly wolf lord rose from his seat. Lord Brennan, Dahlia remembered, one of the nobles who had been at her presentation weeks ago. He had gray in his beard and scars on his hands, and the bearing of a man who had fought in too many wars. He crossed the hall slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When he reached Dahlia, he stopped, looked at her with ancient eyes that had seen too much to be easily deceived. Then he dropped to one knee. "I served the old king," Lord Brennan said quietly, "and his father before him. I have seen corruption and I have seen power, and I know the difference." He bowed his head. "I accept you, Dahlia of the Moonfire, and I will stand with you against any who do not." One by one, other nobles rose, other knees bent, other heads bowed. Not all of them. Dahlia could see some faces still set with suspicion, some wolves slipping toward the doors rather than acknowledge what had happened. But enough. Enough had seen the truth burning in her eyes, had witnessed the justice she'd delivered to the man who threatened them all. Enough had chosen to believe. The moment the last noble knelt, Dahlia felt her legs begin to give way. The exhaustion she'd been holding at bay crashed over her like a wave, and she swayed, her vision graying at the edges. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Nikolai. She knew his scent before she could focus her eyes. Pine and wood smoke, and that wild, masculine musk that made her wolf purr with contentment. He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing, as if she were something infinitely precious. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he murmured against her hair. "You could have let me help. It had to be me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but she knew he could hear her. "They had to see that I'm not what he claimed, that my power isn't corruption." Nikolai pressed a kiss to her forehead, and she felt the mate bond singing between them, brighter and stronger than it had ever been. "Everyone out," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "The feast is over. Clear the hall." He carried her from the great hall, ignoring the murmurs and stares of the departing nobles, climbing the stairs to his private chambers, the ones she'd never entered before. His rooms were larger than hers, dominated by a massive bed draped in furs and a fireplace that crackled with welcoming warmth. He laid her down gently, brushing hair from her face. his golden eyes roaming over her features as if memorizing every detail. "Are you hurt?" His hands traced her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries with a desperateness that betrayed his earlier composure. "The baby, we're fine." Dahlia caught his hands, stilling them. "Tired. So tired. But fine." Nikolai let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt him trembling. This powerful alpha king, this man who commanded armies and ruled territories, trembling because he'd been afraid for her. "I wanted to kill him myself," he admitted roughly. "Every moment you were standing there, facing him alone, my wolf was screaming at me to tear him apart. But you asked me to trust you. And I—" His voice cracked. "Dahlia, watching you like that was the hardest thing I've ever done." She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "But you did it," she said softly. "You trusted me. You let me fight my own battle. I would do anything for you." The words came out raw, unguarded. "Anything. That terrifies me." "It terrifies me too." She smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and genuine and full of a hope she'd never allowed herself to feel before. But maybe that's what love is, being terrified and trusting anyway. Nikolai's breath caught. "Love," he repeated, his voice hushed. "Love." Dahlia traced the line of his jaw, the strong column of his throat. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know there's still so much I don't know about you. So much you don't know about me. But when I was standing in that hall, facing Caspian, there was only one thing I was absolutely certain of." She drew him closer, until their lips were nearly touching. "I want to spend the rest of my life figuring out the rest of it. With you." He kissed her then, tender and fierce all at once, a claiming and a promise wrapped together. When he pulled back, his eyes had gone molten gold, his wolf rising close to the surface. "Dahlia." His voice had dropped to a rough growl. "I need to mark you. My wolf. After watching that, after seeing you face him alone, I don't think I can wait any longer. But I need you to tell me you want this. That you're choosing this. Choosing me. Not just because of the bond." She silenced him with another kiss. "I choose you," she whispered against his mouth. "My king. My mate. I want your mark, Nikolai. And I want you to wear mine." The growl that rumbled from his chest made her whole body shiver. He lowered her back against the furs, hovering over her with barely leashed intensity. His hands were gentle as they traced the neckline of her crimson gown, reverent as they bared the curve of her shoulder. "Tell me if anything hurts." His voice was rough, barely human. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "I don't want you to stop." She arched into his touch, baring her throat in the ancient gesture of submission and trust. "I want all of you." He pressed his lips to the junction of her neck and shoulder, and she felt his fangs extend. Longer now, sharper, built for this singular purpose. The anticipation was almost unbearable, every nerve in her body singing with awareness. "Mine," Nikolai growled against her skin. Then he bit down. The pain was sharp and bright, cutting through her like lightning. But almost immediately it began to transform, the burning sensation shifting into something else, something that felt like liquid gold pouring through her veins. She gasped, clutching at his shoulders, feeling the bond between them explode into full brilliance. She could feel him, not just his body pressed against hers, not just his teeth in her flesh, but him, his soul, his heart, the depths of his emotions that he usually kept so carefully guarded. His love for her, vast as an ocean, his fear that he would somehow fail her, his fierce territorial joy at finally claiming what was his. And underneath it all, a vulnerability that made her heart ache. The lonely boy who had grown into a lonely king, who had never believed he would find someone who could see all of him and still choose to stay. I see you, she thought, knowing somehow that he could hear her through the bond. I choose you, all of you. His response was a surge of overwhelming love that brought tears to her eyes. When he finally pulled back, his mouth smeared with her blood, his eyes blazing pure gold, Dahlia didn't give him time to speak. She rose up, her wolf giving her strength she shouldn't have had after expending so much power, and found the pulse point at the side of his throat. My turn, she murmured, and she bit down. His blood filled her mouth, rich and wild, tasting of forest and moonlight and everything she'd ever wanted without knowing how to name it. She felt him shudder, felt his arms tighten around her, felt the bond between them complete itself with a resonance that seemed to echo through the very stones of the castle. She was his. He was hers. And nothing, not prophecies, not persecution, not all the darkness in the world, would ever separate them again. Yours, Nikolai gasped, his voice breaking on the word. Mine, she breathed against his throat. Mate, they whispered together. The words settled into their bones like coming home, like finding a place where they had always belonged, even before they knew each other existed. Dahlia felt her wolf howl with triumph, felt her daughter kick as if celebrating the completed bond, felt years of fear and loneliness begin to finally heal. They held each other for a long time afterward, wrapped in the furs of his bed, listening to each other breathe. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Outside the windows, the autumn wind had gentled, and Dahlia could see stars beginning to emerge from behind the clouds. The nobles, she murmured eventually, tracing idle patterns on his chest. There were some who didn't kneel, some who left rather than accept me. Nikolai made a dismissive sound. They'll come around, or they'll leave. Either way, it changes nothing. He pressed a kiss to the healing mark on her throat. You're my Luna now, my queen. And anyone who challenges that will answer to both of us. Luna, queen. The words felt strange, ill-fitting. She had spent so long thinking of herself as nothing, as no one. But when Nikolai looked at her with that warmth, that pride, that unshakable love, she could almost begin to see herself the way he saw her. Powerful, worthy, loved. We should rest, he said, pulling her closer. Tomorrow there will be ceremonies, announcements, politics. He grimaced. So much politics. Dahlia laughed softly. You sound thrilled. I became a king because I had no choice. I became your mate because I was lucky beyond all measure. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. But there is one thing I've been meaning to ask you. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain in a way she'd never seen from him. His other hand came to rest on her belly, so gentle, so reverent. The baby, he said quietly. Do you know, is it a girl, like the prophecy said? Dahlia smiled. Yes, a girl. I've known since before the river, though I didn't tell anyone. Caspian knew somehow. That's why he was so determined to kill me. The prophecy apparently refers specifically to a daughter of the Moonfire line. Nikolai's expression softened into something almost heartbreakingly tender. A daughter. Our daughter. I've been thinking about names. She covered his hand with hers. There was a Moonfire queen, centuries ago, who ended the first great persecution, who brought peace between our bloodline and the wolves who hunted us. Her name was Seraphina. Seraphina? Nikolai tested the word, then nodded slowly. It's beautiful. Strong. His thumb traced circles on her belly. Our Seraphina. The months that followed were not easy. There were nobles to placate, treaties to renegotiate, old prejudices to carefully dismantle. Word of what had happened at the feast spread across the territories, some versions heroic, some monstrous, most somewhere in between. Wolves came to the castle to see for themselves this Moonfire queen who had burned her enemy to ash and then begged only for peace. Most left convinced of her sincerity. A few required more persuading. None left doubting her power. Dahlia grew heavier with each passing week, her belly rounding as Seraphina grew strong within her. Nikolai was constantly at her side, or, when duties forced him elsewhere, connected to her through the singing thread of their mate bond. She felt his love like a constant warmth in her chest, felt his worry when she pushed herself too hard, felt his fierce pride when she stood before councils and courts and spoke with the authority she'd never known she possessed. The cult compound was discovered and razed to the ground, its prisoners freed, its leaders brought to justice. Marta took charge of healing those who had survived, including several children who had been born within those walls, who had never known any life but servitude. Dahlia visited them often, holding babies who might have been her daughter, might have been herself in another life, promising them they would never know that darkness again. On the first day of winter, with snow falling softly outside the castle windows, Seraphina Ashford was born. She came into the world screaming, her tiny fists waving, her eyes, when they finally opened, showing silver-gray irises that glowed faintly with moonfire light. The midwives gasped, but Dahlia only laughed, cradling her daughter against her chest. "Hello, little warrior," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Nikolai entered the birthing chamber with an expression of barely contained terror that would have been comical if Dahlia hadn't been so exhausted. But when she placed Seraphina in his arms, when he looked down at that tiny face and saw his mate's eyes looking back at him, all the fear melted away. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Dahlia, she's absolutely perfect." "She's loud," Dahlia corrected with a tired smile, "and demanding, and definitely has your stubbornness." "My stubbornness?" He raised an eyebrow. "I believe I've met your stubbornness, my love, and it could move mountains." Seraphina chose that moment to let out a particularly impressive wail, and both parents dissolved into helpless laughter. The formal presentation ceremony took place a week later. Nobles from across the territory gathered once again in the Great Hall, the same hall where Dahlia had burned her enemy to ash, where she had claimed her place and her power. This time, though, she sat on a throne beside Nikolai, wearing a crown of silver and moonstone, their daughter cradled in her arms. "Lords and ladies of the Ashford territory," Nikolai announced, his voice ringing with pride, "I present to you Princess Seraphina Ashford, first of her name, heir to the throne, daughter of the Moonfire and the crown." The nobles knelt. All of them this time, even those who had once doubted, who had whispered and wondered. They knelt because they had seen the kind of queen Dahlia had become, had witnessed her justice and her mercy in equal measure. They knelt because they knew, with absolute certainty, that this child would be raised to protect them rather than harm them. Dahlia met Nikolai's eyes over their daughter's head, and she felt the mate bond pulse between them, strong and steady and endlessly deep. "Mine," she thought. "Yours," he answered through the bond. "Ours," they agreed together, looking down at the small miracle in her arms. Later that night, after the ceremony ended and the guests departed, Dahlia stood at the window of the nursery, watching snow fall on the castle grounds. Seraphina slept peacefully in her cradle, exhausted from being held and admired by so many strangers. Nikolai's arms wrapped around Dahlia from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. Dahlia leaned back into his warmth, savoring the solid reality of him. "I'm thinking about how different my life could have been, if you hadn't heard me screaming, if you hadn't pulled me from the river." "Don't." His arms tightened. "Don't think about that. I'm not thinking about it with fear. Not anymore. She turned in his embrace, facing him, cupping his face in her hands. I'm thinking about how grateful I am. For you. For her. For all of it. He kissed her softly, reverently, the way he always kissed her, as if she were something precious and powerful and entirely his. I love you, he said quietly. My mate, my queen, my miracle. Dahlia smiled, feeling the truth of his words echo through every fiber of her being, through the mate bond that bound them, through the mark on her throat that proclaimed her his, through the matching mark on his throat that proclaimed him hers. I love you too, she answered, my king, my protector, my home. And standing there, in the quiet nursery with their daughter sleeping nearby and snow falling softly outside the windows, Dahlia Ashford finally understood what she had been searching for all those years, hiding in kitchen corners, dreaming of escape, desperate for something she couldn't name. Not just safety, not just freedom, love. She had found it in the arms of a king who had seen her at her most broken and had chosen her anyway. She had claimed it with fire and blood and a courage she hadn't known she possessed. And she would spend the rest of her life cherishing it, protecting it, growing it. Because that was what the Moonfire Queens had always truly been about. Not destruction, but love. Not darkness, but light. And Dahlia's light would never hide again.